Today, our team is going to cover how we're actually dealing with not just one, but two pandemics, why your antivirus is trash and what you can do to fight back, and zero trust security. All right, at this time, I would like to introduce our two main speakers today, Neal Juern and Danny Jenkins. Neal Juern has raised awareness about cybersecurity within the community by educating San Antonio executives about cyber risks and protection. Neal has been invited to speak about cybersecurity to many organizations in the past. Juern Technology is a complete technology solutions provider for the greater San Antonio area. What differentiates Juern Technology from other IT service providers is their dedication to network security and building cyber resilience from the inside out. Danny Jenkins is a technical guru with a deep understanding of corporate IT and cybersecurity. He has entrepreneurial background and 2 decades of experience in building and securing corporate networks. Before taking the reins at ThreatLocker, Danny held CEO and CTO positions at multiple IT companies around the world and founded a few cybersecurity businesses of his own.
Thanks, Bella, for the intro. Just a little bit more about me. I worked in enterprise IT for about 14 years at a company that started in Texas and then grew to become a nationwide company. So kind of gave me the experience of that company with, just a few hundred employees, built many data centers, and scaled that to a network with thousands of computers and users. So I kind of took that experience and applied it to small to mid-sized businesses. I also had a great opportunity. I worked for Texas A&M University, and I was an adjunct professor, taught a lot of the Microsoft certification classes, and it was just a great opportunity for me just to kind of advance my skills. And I just brought all that experience into IT services. Danny, I know you have some interesting background. Could you tell us just a little bit?
Yeah, so I'm trying not to send you to sleep. I've done a lot of corporate IT. I've worked in corporate IT and held the reign in many cybersecurity companies in the past. Probably the more interesting roles that I've held is one is as a white hat hacker, showing businesses really with the intention of trying to convince them that they need to do more, how easy it is to get around your security and how to compromise you, not just at the point where you can say, oh, I got somebody to click something, but where you can cause real business damage and you can show data loss as a result. But unfortunately also on a lot of ransomware recoveries, where both on the small business side and on the large enterprise side, where I've seen businesses completely crippled and unfortunately in too many cases not recovered from somebody opening an email attachment or something going wrong through poor IT management.
Yeah, that's obviously part of what led you to start ThreatLocker, I would assume, right?
Yeah, well, that's it. I mean, I had to make a decision. Do we try and change the trajectory on how we're trying to stop this, or do we just keep watching people and taking lots of money from people to try and recover when they fail? So,
Yep.
Rightly or wrongly, we chose the good guys. So, but it's a big problem out there, and it's a big problem that doesn't just affects everybody, small and large business.
Kind of a funny thing, when we sent out an email to our email list about the webinar, this is one of the replies we got. This gentleman who knows us pretty well, he says, "Greetings, just checking in and hope you guys are well. I wish there was some antivirus for COVID-19, LOL." So that's kind of where we're all at, right? We've been dealing with this real physical pandemic, and I know with our clients, there's been quite a few concerns kind of out in the market about, how is this impacting their businesses? So we've sent out surveys and we individually talk to our different customers to figure out, how are they doing? What do they need help with? Interesting thing is 80% of the survey results said they were somewhat optimistic about at least where the economy is going toward the end of the year and part of next year. But the concerns that came up were really interesting to us. Like, they're worried about sustaining momentum as a company. Are they going to have a major drop off in productivity, overcoming fear in the marketplace, stuff like that? And one of our team members kind of summed it up as, our clients just want to fearlessly grow their business. They don't want to be hindered by, COVID-19 or any kind of online virus or anything like that. And there's the bad news is this though, is the hackers have kind of taken this time and used it to their advantage, right? So this article from Wired, if you look at it, Wired magazine, they said hackers laid the groundwork months ago for attacks. Now they're flipping the switch. And you would think, well, why would they do that? And it's people are distracted and so on. So we're gonna kind of take you through a few high level examples and then talk about what it looks like for small businesses too. So this one comes to us from Popular Mechanics, Honda. So this was, I guess it happened on June 9th. It actually shut down their entire production line. So the attack, and we won't get into too much of the technical details right now, but the attack, the way they attack them is something that is preventable specifically with ThreatLocker. But so it's, really no one's immune. Even these large organizations are not immune if they don't take the right precautions. Here's an interesting one. LG, this was in Forbes, June 25th. Not only did they encrypt their files, but they stole source code as well. So, and when you think about that, right, what is the value? Yeah, it's one thing to pay a ransom, but what's the value of that source code? LG is a technology company, who knows how valuable that is. Last one I'll show you is California University in San Francisco. They couldn't recover, so they just paid the ransom. They paid 1.14 million. This was June 26th. This article came out in Bloomberg. They were working on COVID-related antibody testing. So they said it wasn't affected by the breach, but they were still motivated to pay $1.41 million. And so what do they all have in common? They're big organizations, and it all happened within the last 2 months, during COVID, right? So, and the temptation is to believe that if you're a small business that you're immune, that you're not a target, but it's actually the opposite. This number is an old number, but it hasn't gotten any better. Is 71% of ransomware attacks are targeted at small business. And here's an example that just happened June 10th. Eight-person company, so they have 8 computers. They get hit with ransomware, and they pay $150,000 to recover. And we always like to use this phrase, security through obscurity just doesn't work. You're not hiding because they find you. They'll find those vulnerabilities if you don't take precautions. So
it's interesting you say that.
Yeah.
I was speaking at a ConnectWise event just before COVID happened in March in Chicago, and there was about 120 managed IT companies like yourself in the room. And I asked everybody who hadn't had a client with ransomware recently to raise their hand.
Yep.
And 2 people out of 120 raised their hand. And it's really quite terrifying to think, and these guys are all managing small business. They're not managing Honda or airlines or banks. Right. They're managing 10 user, 2 user, 20 user, 50, 100 user companies. And their clients are being targeted over and over again. And unfortunately, it's very profitable for these guys because, well, we think most small businesses take the approach of, I'm not really that scared because who wants my stuff? I'm not that important. Well, it's not whether they want your stuff, it's whether you want your stuff. And if they can hold that you hostage, you have to ask yourself, if you were to take even an 8-employee business, that's still over $500,000 of revenue in most cases. If you were about to lose that, would you write a check for $150,000 to get it back?
Exactly. It's well said. Well said. This example that I have up on screen is a company that is our customer now. Before they were our customer, they got hit with ransomware. They had an IT provider, and the first thing they said to us, like almost the first thing out of his mouth when I met with him, was, we were hit with ransomware. What can you do to help us stop that from happening again? And so we showed him our security stack, and we showed him how ThreatLocker worked, and they signed a contract very quickly with us. So he even wrote that as a manager, because he's an IT guy, he's a technical guy, cybersecurity is one of their top concerns, and he just appreciates having a partner who who makes that a priority, you know. And for all the IT providers on the webinar, you know, it's time to really make it a huge priority. We're going to show you, I'm going to pass control over to Danny here, and we're going to see if we can show you just show you how antivirus isn't enough, really. So that's what it kind of boils down to. There we go.
So, I've got a couple of trick examples here, just to give you an example of how an antivirus can be bypassed. And this is one I used the other day, actually, at an event that Neal saw with, I'm going to use a device called a rubber ducky here. And essentially oh, I don't think is my screen sharing? Oh, I don't think I need to share first.
There we go. Yep.
Okay, so essentially I've got this device here, and I've got this laptop here, and I've got and this is referred to as a rubber ducky. And well, this is a little bit of trickery in that it's a cool little trick. You don't have to use one of these devices. There's another number of examples over the last few months that people have been able to do this directly from Office or directly from Internet Explorer or even Zoom at the beginning of COVID. And what I'm essentially going to do here is it looks like a normal USB drive, but it's not a USB drive at all. It won't be blocked by a USB drive policy. It's actually a keyboard that when I plug it into the computer, it sends 1,000 words a minute to the screen. And you'll see when I plug it in, and this laptop here is just a demo laptop. I have ThreatLocker disabled on it. I've put it to a monitor only mode. It types in a command that essentially weaponizes your own tools against you. So it fires off a PowerShell command in the background, and it starts uploading my data to this public web platform. So I can now go on this, and this link's available for anyone. It's not real files. So you can go on, you can see everything from my documents folder, and there's just 2 files in my documents folder, which is 2 sample files. But it essentially uploaded those in the background. Now, I've seen a number of breaches like this in small businesses. In medical clinics, it's very, very popular, where if you've got a medical clinic and you've got a desk at the front and someone's taking your insurance card and they're turning around and they're scanning it, you essentially just walk up behind the computer and you plug this in. Now, in this case, we just copy data, but where I've seen attacks, they tend to get far more malicious. They'll actually download a payload, run that payload on that computer, leave it there, and then they'll go and access the network overnight, run ransomware. And it's not just medical clinics, but car dealers or point of sale systems, or anywhere where you have somebody who's potentially able to walk in your office. It doesn't take much to think that somebody can just plug that device in. I needed to press no keys whatsoever. And you can see there that literally it just accessed those files and sent them up to the internet. And actually, if you look in the ThreatLocker portal here, if I can move the Zoom thing out my way, I can see I've got this monitoring, so it's not blocking anything. But I can see these files being accessed by PowerShell in the background. And in this case, I didn't even need to install malware on your machine. I just took the tools you have and used them against you. We saw the same attacks happen in last year. There was a vulnerability in Internet Explorer. What that allowed attackers to do was run these exact same commands on your machine just by you visiting a website. You didn't have to click on anything, you didn't have to download anything. You just opened up a web page and suddenly someone was running similar commands to this on your computer. The next time we saw this was in Zoom earlier on this year, where Zoom was able to launch PowerShell. Someone could send a link, and they could potentially either steal credentials or launch PowerShell or launch malware on your machine without any interaction or very little interaction from a user. And we also see it regularly in Office documents, where somebody opens a Word document, it runs a macro, and it's doing similar attacks. So that's one of the examples I wanted to share. And I'm actually, there's one other that's a very common use case, and I'm just going to change my host here so I can switch to my other computer. Another example is, and this is a very, very common example as well, and I would have used this type of technique if I was showing people how to show up their system, is to convince somebody to open something. Now, a lot of businesses say, oh, I'm not going to open an EXE. I'm not going to download it and run it from the internet. But you have to think, you won't. And when I was doing penetration testing to show people how to get into their network, I would never go after the CEO or the CFO directly, because those guys typically were more computer literate and they're less likely to be tricked. But if I can go send an email to someone at the front desk or someone in the accounting department who maybe isn't used to it, saying, oh, can you pay this invoice? And then I have this invoice here and I've downloaded this invoice and it looks like an Excel file. What happens when I open that file is it's actually opening a program, and in the background, and I've turned off blocking on ThreatLocker for that file. Now, the thing is, I digitally sign that. And by the way, the bad guys sign their files too. So you can see here that I allowed it just before this call so we could demonstrate it, and it's signed by ThreatLocker. But you can see here as well, if I go into denies, it couldn't do this because I didn't disable all security in ThreatLocker, just enough to let it run. That it actually tried to access my file shares on my network, if I put that in there. So it tried to actually access my files, and then it was denied and shut down from that point. But from a user point of view, what I would have done if I wanted to get around someone's security and I wanted the important data, I would send something like, it could be a Word document that automatically downloads and runs something, or it could be a link to an exe that has an Excel icon on it saying, oh, click on this, can you repay this invoice? The person doesn't know the difference between the exe or a DLL or a script file or an XLX file. So they just opened it. It looks like a correct icon. I'm now on their machine. And what I can do from their machine, even if they don't have privileges to everything, I can start accessing all of their files, but I can also start swapping out files. So I could take this file and swap out a file on your file server to maybe a common document. I'd look for something like staff vacation days or a weekly payroll run or something that I think other people would run, swap out that document to an exe. Again, the extensions are hidden by default in Windows. And then now the CEO comes in the morning, he doesn't think twice, it's in a location he expected it, he double clicks on it. I even present him with the original file so he doesn't think anything suspicious. And now I'm on that computer, and now I can get access to their bank access, their passwords, I can put keyloggers and run anything. And all of these tools, sometimes they got picked up by the antivirus and sometimes they didn't, and we had to tweak them. But the reality is we never failed to get around the antivirus because we're not running malware. We're running custom-driven tools to extract data and steal files. And from a known malware point of view, they're not known. And from a behavioral point of view, they're no different to legitimate applications like Dropbox, which synchronizes your data to the internet, or Google Drive, or anything else like Zoom or TeamViewer or something else that can be used against you.
Wow, that is some scary stuff. Pass control back to me there, if you would, Danny. And what really strong and illustrates there that Danny showed you is just that antivirus just isn't enough. You know, you think that antivirus, or even like Danny just said, behavioral analysis type tools, many of them just won't catch it because it just seems so normal. It just seems so normal. We're going to take a short pause here. If anyone has any specific questions they want to put in the Q&A section of Zoom, there's a little Q&A section. If you want to click there and type a question, we'll try to answer those as we go. If we don't have any right now, we'll keep going, and we're going to do this again coming up. So
there's no questions right now, so go ahead and keep going, and if there is a question, we will address it at the next question break.
Sounds good. Okay, so I wanted to kind of take you through one little customer example and talk just a minute about what is application whitelisting. So like Danny just showed you, unlike antivirus, application whitelisting puts you in control over what software, scripts, executables run on your computer. It's a default deny approach, right? So not only does it stop malicious software, it also stops anything else that's not permitted to run on your computer. So because we run this internally and at our customers, we will oftentimes see things get requested that really have no business use at all, games or things so it also serves as kind of a tool to monitor what other, applications are attempting to be installed on your network. So my customer example is this. We have this customer who's a customer now. At the time, they weren't a customer. They were with another IT provider, and they got hit with ransomware 3 different times. Each time they had downtime, and they were just getting more and more concerned that, this was going to really cause major damage to their business. So the other IT company, he kind of threw up his hand and said, I'm just going to turn on Microsoft's application whitelisting. It's kind of their answer to zero trust, except you can't really manage it very well at all. I mean, you have to do it all in group policy. It's a nightmare, total nightmare. So they become our customer now, and we go to them and say, look, we don't want to manage this. This is terrible. Every time someone has a go to meeting, the application won't run. We have no efficient way to whitelist it, and they said absolutely not. They said this thing, whatever he did, has stopped the ransomware. The application whitelisting did stop them from getting infected, but it wasn't manageable. So that was kind of a wake-up call, and this was several years ago, like 3, where we said, okay, there's a place for this. This technology is really good at stopping threats, but how can we use it? How can we manage this? How are we going to take advantage of it? And it wasn't until a little over a year ago that we found ThreatLocker, just kind of by accident. And so it's a big deal. And so we learned kind of through our customer how powerful this is, and we've rolled it out to every client. We're gonna
just on that. It's worth noting that when you're running an application on your computer, often computer users assume I'm not an administrator, so I'm not at risk. And being an administrator is bad. But if you run something, if you download and you run Zoom or you run Angry Birds, none of which require you to be an administrator, that application has access to everything you do. So whether it's ransomware or a game that gets compromised, it can easily access anything that you can access as an individual. So if you can see the company's finances, if you can see a customer list, if you can see source code, so can that application. So the idea of the whitelisting or the zero trust approach in general, is to assume that all applications are bad. And that way you're not worried if someone accidentally runs something, and then have a proper approval process to allow new software. But then to also assume that once an application is running, once Angry Birds is running or PowerShell is running, that it shouldn't be able to access things it can't do. And to really simplify that in terms of non-IT terms, if you like, non-geek speak, if you're securing your house and you want to put an antivirus in it, that's your house alarm. It's going to detect some guy coming in. It's got a motion sensor. It's got a contact sensor, and you can add multiple layers and advanced antiviruses, and you can add a glass breaking sensor, all these different things. And it's going to detect someone coming into your house. To put whitelisting to that equation, the antivirus isn't going to, even if you've got 3 house alarms with 3 different types of sensors, someone can still walk through your front door, take the TV off the wall and walk out. Yes, there's a lot of noise, but it doesn't stop them doing it. It's not a physical control. Whereas when you use a whitelisting approach or a zero trust approach, with the whitelisting, first you can say, well, nobody gets in the front door unless I let them in. There's a big bolt on it, and I'm going to look at them and I'm going to say, do I like you? Am I going to let you in the front door? And we're not going to do that. Actually, I'm not going to say anyone in the house. I'm going to say the parents can only, because the kids will let anyone in because they're dumb. So, and then the next thing is, once someone's in your house, you want to be able to control where they go. So if you have a pool guy, you don't let him in the entire house. He can go in the backyard. He can go in the pool shed. My daughter's boyfriend, he's not going in her bedroom. He's allowed in the family room and the kitchen. And so by applying a zero trust approach, you're not looking out and saying, oh, is someone good or something bad? You're just saying nothing gets in unless we say whether it's good or bad. And then when it's in, we're controlling what it can do, and controlling what parts of our system, what files it can access. So your users can play those games. Like I allowed that invoice there, which was clearly malware, and I knew that, but it wasn't able to access my files still, because even though I permitted it, it couldn't access my data.
That's a perfect tee up for our polling questions here. I'm gonna launch the poll here.
And hey, while they're answering those questions, I do have an attendee question here from Anonymous. They said, I was reluctant to join this webinar because my company doesn't support using Zoom. How safe is this application?
Interesting. Danny would probably know more than me about that, but they've made tremendous improvements recently because of vulnerabilities that were discovered. So what do you think, Danny?
So I think everything you run is a potential danger. And when you run applications, you make decisions on whether I want to take the business risk versus not. In terms of Zoom versus the other meeting platforms, I would say Zoom have taken a lot of steps, and they're probably on the more secure side than, say, Teams or GoToWebinar or some of the other ones. I'm not happy with it. I don't like the fact that I can send an executable to everyone now and they can download their exe. And there's your IT department would never allow you to send an executable by email, but I can send it through Zoom. But I can with every chat platform. I think what's important is that the way we are running Zoom right now is you can't send me an executable. Right. and Neal, you can't send Neal, and I can't send Neal a PowerShell script, even if he was running the older version, because he has it ring fenced. Right. The newer versions, they've tied a lot of it down. Zoom is just like any piece of software. There are vulnerabilities. They've made massive improvements. I feel more comfortable using Zoom than I would some of the other platforms right now. But equally, I would treat it as a potential risk in your company. Use it where you need it, and where you do need it, make sure you ring fence it. Make sure it can't access your files. So if it does get compromised, the amount of damage it can do is massively limited. Yeah. And that applies to everything.
Yeah, you're right. It applies to everything. Everything is vulnerable in some way. So you have to take the extra precautions. So,
we have one more question here from Peter.
Yep.
He says, we don't openly reveal our security stack by identifying specific brands, nor do we hide it. We just don't drop brands to customers. Do you have marketing material designed for MSP use that we can promote ThreatLocker without mentioning the ThreatLocker brand?
Yes, so we have completely brandable from a ThreatLocker perspective. We have all of our marketing material is brandable, and you can even brand the pop-up. So when the user does get something blocked, they don't see whether it's ThreatLocker or whether it's something else.
And I wanted to look at these poll results. The first question is, do you know someone personally who's been hit? And 82% of people said yes. 50-50 about whether people knew about application whitelisting or zero trust. And then the last one came out exactly correct. Still the most popular way that people get in is through email attachments, or the next one would be social engineering or tricking people, and then breaking in through vulnerabilities. So they're all vulnerabilities, they're all problems, but it seems like we got some pretty smart people here. So let me launch this next slide here. Okay, so how does ransomware impact businesses? And there's a lot of information out there. This is just a small piece of what happens to a lot of businesses that lose their data. And businesses that lose access to their data for more than 10 days are extremely vulnerable. And the ones, many of them never recover. There are a lot of small, especially smaller businesses that never fully recover. And it does mean that they go out of business. And it's a shocking statistic. It comes from the U.S. Small Business Administration, and it's true. So protecting your data, like, that's our top concern as an IT company. That's our number one thing we do. But it should be for every business. It should be, how do we avoid this? Prevention is the way, right? Cleanup is never good. You definitely want to work more on the prevention side. And then we get asked, whoops, I went one slide too many. We get asked a lot, like, what are your top solutions for this, to prevent things like this from happening? And there are many, like, our security stack is pretty long, but we've narrowed it down to 6. And we're really only talking today mainly about application whitelisting, but these other ones are all relevant. So if you are a local business here in San Antonio and you want to know more of this, we do have a opportunity where we can share more of this with you. We just don't have time today, but these are the 6. So if you want to take a quick snapshot of that, these are the things you should be looking at. The number one thing on that poll was email attachments. Well, everybody needs better email filtering. I mean, what comes with Office 365 or Microsoft 365 isn't enough. I mean, it's stuff just flies right through. So these are just examples, but they're the top things, and we're going to just continue on with talking about application whitelisting.
It's funny you mentioned that on the email. My last company that I sold was an email filtering company, and
okay,
we had 16 antiviruses built into our email platform, and stuff still got through the platform.
Yep.
And of course, it was all about reducing the probability, but there wasn't a day that went by where there wasn't ticket after ticket after ticket after ticket. Why did this get through? Why did this get through?
Yep.
And these were some advanced platforms, not the stuff that's thrown in free of charge included in the platform. Like I said, 16 antiviruses, and we're still banging our head against the wall saying we just can't detect all this stuff. It's just too much of it. There's too many different ways.
I know it's too much. And so, when you have a security stack, it's all the things, but for us, the most significant one that we've added has been application whitelisting in the last 2 years easily. And that's where ThreatLocker really comes in. And that's why we say it's the single most effective security solution we've added in the last 2 years, is because it, like Danny described, it's about only letting the good stuff in. Antivirus and all of that tries to determine what's bad, and I prefer to determine what's good. It's just it's a better approach.
Smaller list.
Yeah, exactly. It's a smaller list, believe it or not. You would never have thought that years ago, but it's a much smaller list. So I think we'll do, Danny, we'll have you maybe show just something how ThreatLocker does part of what it does, the blocking piece maybe.
Yeah.
Do you want that on your laptop? Or?
No, on my main computer if you can.
Your main computer? Okay.
That laptop's my victim machine.
Okay. All right.
So
there we go. All right. So that you should have control there.
So just to talk a little bit about what it actually looks like to move from a zero trust, from a trust everything to or trust everything that you can't determine as bad to a zero trust environment. As a business, this is something that should be managed by your IT department and your IT provider. And if your MSP isn't including this, you should ask them why they're not including, whether it's ThreatLocker or whether they've ventured out to something far more complex. But it should be part of your security platform. And if you look at the federal government, that has mandated it for government agencies now, application whitelisting must be included. So you should contact your IT department, your MSP, if they're not using it, or talk to Neal and ask them why, what are they doing? How are they protecting you from it? There's a transition period where, as traditionally in IT, the world started wide open. And if we go back to the 90s, there was no such thing as firewalls on PCs, and even the email servers were open relays. And as we've seen the last 2 decades go on, we've seen things get more and more tied down. And the success of PCs has also been the complete failure of the internet as well. As an MSP, when you roll a zero trust solution out, when you roll ThreatLocker out, what essentially happens is we learn what's on your environment. So we're not here to judge what's good and bad. We're here to say, this is what your environment looks like now. So you can very quickly see within a couple of hours of installing, oh, here's a list of all the apps we're using. And then you can make a decision on that. Do I want NordVPN? Do I want Google Chrome? Do I want PuTTY on my user's computer? And you can review this list and you can deny what you don't want. And we deal with the updates of the applications and solve a lot of the problems that you'd expect, like when an app updates or you push a patch out through Automate or there's a Windows update. But essentially you get a list of applications, you decide what should and shouldn't be included. We start logging what's happening on your machine. So when people are opening applications, when files are being accessed, when people are copying things to USB drives, you can see all of that in here. You let this learn what your environment looks like. And then at the end of the learning period, which is typically a week, I've seen people do it really quick. I've seen people not learn, but typically it's a week. And at the end of that period, if somebody tries to run something that isn't trusted, I'm going to delete one of my previous policies that I didn't do before. So when somebody does download a Word document or an Office document or something, they're essentially going to get a pop-up to say, oh, this isn't trusted in your environment. Not because it's good or bad. Do you want to request permission from whoever's responsible for your IT? And they'll get this pop-up. As an IT provider, you can override that. You can brand this as well as our marketing material, and the user can just hit request permission. My machine's doing sort of, and then you can very easily approve it. So you can get a ticket. And Neal mentioned at the beginning that he tried the built-in Windows whitelisting, which one of its many flaws is the fact that it's very, very difficult to manage and to approve new software. But here you can essentially say, oh, PuTTY is something we use across our entire organization, or we use for this computer only. I'm going to permit that. and I'm going to, and within 30 seconds, the user can run that application. And if you want to install new software, you can go through a learning process. If it's custom software, if it's some payroll software that maybe has hundreds of DLLs, you can use our learning mode features to very easily fire off that learning mode, figure out what's required to run, and then create those definitions on your own. Then in addition to that, I mean, we showed the rubber ducky there. That isn't protected by whitelisting because we're essentially weaponizing what's already on your machine. So in addition to that, we have these policies where you can ring fence applications, and you can say, and PowerShell here, I'm sure I've got it in one of these policies. So you can say, okay, we're going to allow this application. We understand PowerShell needs to run, Office uses PowerShell, but that doesn't mean PowerShell needs to go out to the internet. I don't want it uploading my data. Maybe I'm going to allow it to connect to my RMM or my payroll system if I have a specific need, or some kind of system. But outside of that, it doesn't need to be sending my data to Google Cloud like it did in my demonstration. And equally, it doesn't need to be accessing my files. PowerShell doesn't need to access my documents. It doesn't need to access my files. So if the stupid start menu, that's what happens when you. So when somebody does open PowerShell, and whether it's through a rubber ducky or whether they executed it through Zoom, then and they try and copy your files, that gets denied. When they try and access the internet, it gets denied. And you can see here that PowerShell doesn't need to do that. So you can see very carefully here that it's being blocked, and you can always create exceptions as you need to. So if you have a share that PowerShell needs to access, you can do that. And it's very simple. Your client shouldn't be waiting on you for hours. You can do this 30 seconds later, the issue is resolved, and your client can now use the tool they need to use, but only the way they need to use it. So it's very streamlined from a managed service provider point of view, which is important from the MSP, but also important from the business point of view, in that you don't want your MSP being stuck at roadblocks. You don't want your service provider saying, well, it takes 3 hours to permit GoToMeeting. Well, I need this Zoom session now, or I need this GoToMeeting session now. You don't want your MSP blocked by roadblocks. So if you have the proper tools as an MSP, you can deliver a seamless service to your clients. And then you can also get into making sure things are further locked down. So when your client does call you up and say, but I want to run my coupon clipper, I think it's important, you can say, okay, I'm going to let this coupon clipper run. I've given them advice against it, but I'm going to not let it access any files on my system. So if it gets compromised, and then it's not going to be able to encrypt my files or steal my data. And we might think that doesn't happen, but just look back 2 years ago, CCleaner pushed out malware to 2 million people. So having those controls in place is very important. And that's a security company. Imagine what these game writers doing. You've got some guy sitting in his basement creating a computer game. He's not thinking about security. He's not thinking, I mean, Zoom made so many mistakes, and if you get these big corporations like Zoom who miss something really obvious, that when you start allowing other things, that gets even worse. So the less you allow, the better. But it's also important to when you do allow things, you just kind of put a little bit of control around them as well.
Hey, Danny, I have a few questions for you here. Peter, we will get to your question after the demo, because I do see yours here. Hold on to that one for a second. But Danny, I have a question here that says, what percentage of risks involve Windows PCs versus Apple OS and Ubuntu, if you don't mind?
Okay, so unfortunately, and more Windows PCs are used, so more Windows PCs are targeted. Although I did see a report 2 weeks ago that there was actually more ransomware on Macs now than there is on Windows, and we're working to resolve that issue too, because we tend to focus on Windows PCs as a company, and we should have our Apple version coming out soon. The challenge with dealing with Mac versus Windows first is Mac is very, from a security person point of view, you put complete trust in Apple. You can't, it's very difficult to layer security on there. And Apple don't allow you to protect the kernel. They don't allow security vendors to protect the kernel, which has made it in recent days, and they've also become more attractive in in non-business environments. So you're seeing more and more ransomware appear on Macs than you would on a PC. Not that you would on a PC because there's a lot of PCs, but you would have traditionally seen, whereas before they were a tiny fraction of the market and nobody cared about them. But I, in terms of which operating system do I personally think is more targeted, I think probably Windows in total, because it's bigger and more businesses use it. Therefore, there's more. If more businesses use PCs, then it's better to target them. Which one's more secure? I would equally say is Windows from the Mac versus PC background. And
we're definitely seeing a rise in Apple OS attacks.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, and because we're seeing more businesses start to use them, and it's not attractive to steal someone's home photos and ask them for $200,000 for it, because even I'm not paying $200,000 for my kids' photos. If they're not on the wall, I don't want to look at them. But if you take a business, I'm going to take all your production offline if you don't pay me $200,000, that gets a lot more. You're more likely to get paid. So there's that, and then you asked the Ubuntu one. Linux as an operating system has always been a more denied environment, and the smaller the audience, the less likely you are to be attacked. But equally, the more problems you're going to have and the more difficulty you're going to have in finding someone and finding tools to protect those solutions. Yep. So my opinion is when people are diving into the Linux world outside of servers, they're kind of diving in because they want to stand out and be different versus I want to actually get a productive operating system that's going to help me. But that's kind of me. Neal might have more of an opinion on it.
My opinion is that we've noticed is exactly what you said, which is while they're less of a target, there's just not, you don't have the same level of tools available. So you can't use that security through obscurity thing, because they are a target, but you don't have as good of tools. So, it's a thing, you got to be pretty careful with specifically Mac. And we get this news feeds of ransomware and all that, and tons lately have been Mac. So that just kind of shows you what's going on in the market, in the world.
Thanks.
So.
All right, one more quick question. This should be easy to answer. Will any member within the organization have access to this portal? Riley is curious, since they handle most on-site issues to prevent having their IT go in.
Come out. I think that's for us. And Riley, we do what's called co-managed IT as well. So in other words, we work with your internal IT. So you can have full management capabilities of this, so that you can resolve all these issues without having to pay, for our time. We do that with several customers. We just make sure your folks are trained and they know what they're approving, so they don't accidentally approve something that could be malware or something like that. So it's a great question, but we do this already with other customers. So
the one person you shouldn't give access to is the CEO.
Yeah. Don't
give access. Make somebody else check them out. And I'm the CEO of a tech company, and I'm a security guy, and I still don't have access to permit on my own computer. There you go.
Okay, here we go. So share screen.
I did want to add something to the Linux and Mac version. Yeah. Ransomware isn't some magic code that is something special. It's ultimately one of two things. It's a piece of software, and Apple, Windows, Linux-based operating systems, they all support running custom code. So there is no difference. As a ransomware creator, it's not harder to write on one platform or another. So if you're thinking about, Linux can't get ransomware because it's a different beast, or Mac, and somebody literally said that to me, but it still supports running software. So it can't be a different beast. So whatever platform you use, it's worth noting that when you think about it.
Yep. We're going to launch our next set of polling questions. Let me throw that up there. So if we'd love it if everyone would participate in this. It says, do you think it's a good idea to only rely on antivirus to stop the latest threats?
Neal, while they're answering that question, I'm not sure if there's another question slide coming up after these poll questions. But I did have a panelist, Peter. Yep. He's asking, a lot of his customers are local government, and he's wondering if there are any stats as to how ransomware impacts local government agencies. Do you have a good resource for that, or somewhere maybe you can suggest?
I think if you're in Texas, it's 100%, is it not?
Yeah, it's really bad. In Texas, it's really bad.
Yeah, there was 23 cities in Texas taken out in 1 week by ransomware. So I don't have any specific stats, but I know of 3 cases in Florida where over $2 million were paid out, and last July, and I think Texas had a similar case. And the thing is, what surprises me about the local government is, I mean, and I know this from trying to get money out of local government, is impossible. But when we saw the ransomware attacks in Florida, and I watched the panel of it's almost like an HOA, I like to call them. They're sitting in their little circle, and they said, "Oh, who votes to pay $600,000 in Bitcoin to this guy in Ukraine?" And they all just said yes. It's like, wow, I mean, federal government won't pay anything, but local government will just write these checks out, Bitcoin out to essentially cyber terrorists.
I know, and it's a weird quandary, legally, but it's what they're doing. So, okay, so I'm going to end that poll. Let me share those results. So most people say no, don't rely only on antivirus, which we believe is a smart choice there. And most people said a lot more remote workers than in previous years. And that just means you've got to be smarter. You've got to use more security tools. And then how much downtime could a company reasonably afford before it starts costing money? Most people said 2 hours. So these ransomware attacks, I mean, I think the shortest we've heard of people recover is days, not hours. That's for sure. It's very rare to recover that quickly. So good results there.
Can I add one thing on the ransomware as well?
Yep.
And this, hopefully I'm not jumping ahead. Is ransomware attacks, and you've already mentioned this. It's they're not just taking data. If you're in the healthcare industry, we've seen this over and over again. They're not just encrypting your files. We see more and more hospitals having their data taken, and the attacker saying, if you don't pay the ransom, yes, you had a really good offsite backup and congratulations, but if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to dump your data on the web.
Yep.
And we see that. And the thing is we don't hear about that as much in the press, because nobody's going to announce that we've got our data. Someone's going to dump your data on the web. So that tends to be more quiet. But saying all our files are encrypted, our IT systems are taken down, is not nearly as embarrassing. But I can't even count the amount of hospitals and healthcare, not just big hospitals, but clinics that have had those threats saying, we're going to dump this data on the
And
web.
Danny, and Neal, what are your guys' thoughts about getting ransomware attack insurance?
I think you should. This is my opinion. Is you can't do one without the other, right? You should have the right security in place plus insurance. You don't want to just have insurance or just have security. Having both is the best. So you're really covered. A lot of insurance policies require you have a certain level of security before they're going to pay out anyway. So they kind of go hand in hand. At least that's what we've seen. Yeah.
So I agree you should. There's a couple of things I'd like to point out on it. It's kind of like saying I've got insurance on my car, so I'm going to drive like an asshole. But depending on who you ask, whether it's 40% or 60%, but somewhere in that region of people who pay the ransom do not get their data back.
Yeah.
So do not rely on it. And secondly, insurance will not make your business right because you lost all your customers. It will pay the ransom. And the one case recently I know that they had 177,000 ransom. I don't know where they come up with these numbers from. The insurance paid half of that ransom. Because they considered the other cost was part of it was, and they won't pay for your recovery either. They'll just pay for
just
ransom. It doesn't make your business whole, but having insurance in general, if I write off my car and end up crippled, my car's repaired, but I'm not.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of show this quick little slide about how does it work. Like, we're an IT company, we use this with all of our clients. How does it work? So like Danny showed, someone requests, they try to launch something that's not approved, they get the pop-up request permission. In our case, that opens a ticket on our help desk, which our technicians and our help desk see this ticket. It has all the details, like what they were trying to launch, who it was, when, all of that. We do an analysis of it to see, is this legitimate? You know, is there a business reason for it? And is it, you know, legitimate software? And many times that requires us to jump onto their computer, look at where did they get these files from? You know, if they just randomly download them from any website, you know, we're going to be pretty suspicious about things like that. But once we know it's good, we go straight into the approval center, we approve it, and we can approve it for that one computer or for every computer. And that is so powerful, because now, you know, the first time somebody needs to use Bluebeam, you know, for their PDF stuff, we just approve it once for everyone in the organization. So that management is powerful. That's what makes this work. That's why we wouldn't use Microsoft's solution, because it's, you know, you just can't manage it. So
Neal,
let me go ahead.
real quick, when that ticket gets created,
Yep.
prompt for a user, does that get redirected to the MSP RMM via an email address?
It does. It goes. It uses. There's different ways. There's something called an API, right, where ThreatLocker talks directly to our ticketing system and just ships it in. There's also a way where it can go by email address. But
Yeah, so there's APIs depending on your service, and then there's email, which you can use parsing rules. And it's normally to the PSA. Obviously, they're becoming more and more merged into one nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So just to kind of answer the question is, how can you get this level of protection? If you're an IT company and you're on this webinar, there's a link right here. I think we're going to share it in the chat as well, right, Bella?
There it is, everyone.
Okay.
You have scheduled a free demo with ThreatLocker link in the chat.
If you're an IT company and you don't have this, I would just encourage you to do the demo. At least go see the demo in person. It really has been game changing for us. And we've won business because we have this level of protection. If you're a local company and you work in IT, just like the question that came up earlier, schedule a call with us. I mean, we do co-managed IT. We'll be as involved as you want us to be, or as little as you want us to be. We can just be that extra layer when you need help. So in a minute, Bella will give you a link and you can schedule a call with us. If you're local and you don't work in IT, but you are concerned that your organization could be the next victim, which a lot of businesses are, we're going to show you what you can do. We built a webinar offer here. If companies come to us and say, hey, will you do an audit for us to tell us if the zero trust solution will work in our environment, we do charge for that normally. For the people on the webinar, if you want us to do that and you're local in our market, we'll do it for free, but you have till Friday to book it with us. The reason is we've got to get those scheduled before we commit to any other future events and things like that. So,
and that link is now also in the chat for everybody to click on.
Yep. So if you're thinking about it, just book it. You know, there's no obligation. We're just going to help you see how vulnerable you are. It's kind of like we use this in some of our seminars. Ronald Reagan said, you know, trust but verify, right? You may have a good IT department or third-party IT, but it's like accounting, you know. The best accountants, a lot of times there's still an external CPA or auditor that checks. You should do the same thing in IT. If you just trust IT and just assume they've got it all handled, that's a very vulnerable place to be in. So we'd say, hey, schedule it. We're going to do it for free, and you'll at least get an assessment of where you're at. This is 2 local businesses that we work with. Both of them have higher security needs than your average customer. First one is manufacturing, and there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there in manufacturing. There's IoT devices. There's a lot of things where manufacturers have gotten hit, even like Honda, for example. So they said, hey, we want you to, you know, kind of make sure we're as covered as possible. The second one, they're in financial services. And what's interesting about them is they have compliance requirements, and they have all kinds of personally identifiable information that they store. And for them, if that breach happens, like Danny said, it's not just that they hold your data for ransom, but they'll put that on the web, and now you've got loss of reputation, loss of money to recover there. So 2 customers that understand the need for it and have really embraced it. We're going to do one last set of polling questions here. Let me pull that up.
While you're pulling that up, it's worth noting Juern Technology is a ThreatLocker Gold partner, and that actually means something in ThreatLocker, and that we really, for our Gold partnership, it is our highest level of partner, and it's not done through orders, it's done through how seriously they take security, how good a job how much of an advocate they are, and how good a job they do at enforcing and implementing zero trust for their clients. So if you are looking for a partner, you are looking for an IT company, Juern is a great company to work with, and they're going to do a good job at protecting you because they're not there just to say yes. They're there to tell you what's required to protect your business, and they do a great job of that.
Thanks for that, Danny. We appreciate that. And the next polling questions are up, the last set. We'd love it if everyone would participate on that. All right, let me share those results with everybody. Good results. Would you consider adding a zero trust solution like ThreatLocker to your IT security? Over 50% said yes. What is your main business focus for the remainder of 2020? Maintaining your sales and keeping your customers. And we've definitely heard that from some of our customers. And then do you think it's important to get a third-party audit of your IT security? I'm really happy to see a high percentage of people saying yes to that, because that has made the difference for a lot of our clients and we do the same. Like if we're the only IT company working at a customer, we are completely enthusiastic about bringing in a third party to even check us, because it's just that important. You just can't take those risks. So, and we just want to say, hey, thanks for joining our webinar. Stay safe out there. Here's some of our contact information if you want to reach out to us.